Welcome to The Blank Stage, our radio show, folks. I'm Spica.
And I'm Maggie. We have a really good discussion for you guys tonight. Hope you all enjoy.
We're here to talk about shows.
Netflix and chill? Nope, not that kind of show. Theater. Here. What kind of stage is that?
It's a proscenium stage, the most commonly found kind of stage. It's probably the easiest for actors to perform on, and set designers will usually use this to their advantage too.
It's a very familiar setup, and therefore is more comfortable to work on, since there's only one viewpoint. It also makes it easier to control the audience's focus.
Well, let's move on. What's our next picture?
That's a thrust stage. It's a stage configuration where the performance space is more out into the audience than a proscenium. It's a little more up close and personal.
Oh, like for rock concerts! But why is it called a thrust?
Because it looks like someone took the stage and slid it out onto the front rows of the audience. It has viewers on 2 or 3 sides.
It would have 2 sides in case of a runway for models.
So if I'm on the left and the actor is on the right, there better not be anything in the middle to block my view. Tall set pieces have to be kept toward the back, aka upstage.
But the problem here, Maggie, is that the director and actors have to prepare to be seen from more angles, so it can get tricky.
Not as tricky as an arena stage, though. Speaking of which, this right here is an arena stage.
That looks more like a football stadium.
It's actually the same idea. With an arena stage, there's nowhere to hide, so everything is heavily showcased.
I feel so exposed.
But come to think of it, I don't think I've ever seen a stage like this in real life.
I have before. They're not as common, and most of them are smaller. This is actually really cool, though, because it makes the show seem more intimate. Seeing a show on an arena stage is a very unique experience. You can see the show from every angle, so you can bet the staging will have to be very particular to keep the illusion and magic of the story going.
All right. But what if you have an acting space that isn't like any of these types of stages? What then?
Well, that's called a flexible stage. There isn't any typical shape for these ones, and they could be constantly changing.
It's a very unusual type of stage, and it's not used very often. Due to its unusual shape, it helps make any type of show customized to the actors and the company performing it.
The audience may not be able to sit together, but with the way the stage is shaped, but that's part of the appeal. The audience might all sit together, like in a proscenium stage, or scattered all over. It can also help keep the audience's attention on what interests them the most if multiple scenes are going on at once.
Lastly, outside of the theater, there are auxiliary spaces.
What's performed there?
Actually, nothing. This space is intended for audience members. So, for example, bathrooms, the lobby, hallways, and refreshment stands are all auxiliary spaces.
So now we all know why we're doing a radio show, because we can't decide on what kind of stage to use, so we didn't use one. Okay, we'll be right back after a quick ad. Get yourself a healthy snack.
Hey theater goers, do you ever struggle with moving set pieces on stage? Are scene changes becoming a bore? Do your actors have no idea what they're doing when it comes to tech? Well then have we got a product for you. Try Instatechi, this revolutionary product that really helps move those props. It can do anything. If you need a scene change in less than 30 seconds, bam! You need a costume fixed in between scenes, boom! Done. It's simple to use. Just take a can of our patented formula, shake the can, and spray on any incompetent actor or random person, and it instantly transforms them into a seasoned stagehand. Side effects may include poor social life, OCD, and only being able to relate to theater references. Please ask your director if Instatechi is right for you.
And we're back. So now we know all about the different types of stages, but what do we do with them when we're preparing for production?
I'm glad you asked. When staging a new show, the director will have to take into account what type of stage they're using. They'll want to place the actors and sets in a way that will best allow a relationship between them and the audience.
Right, because like we already learned, one of the most important qualities of a show is whether the audience can relate to it.
Exactly. A show that I love is Natasha, Pierre, and the Great Comet of 1812. A thing that's cool about it is that some audience are actually sitting on the stage. During party scenes, they get to really be a part of the show.
So that has to do with the influence of the theatrical space on the performance too. Big acting spaces mean that some people might not be able to hear very well. Also, if the theater is super nice and fancy, it sets an expectation for very refined work and skilled acting, with lots of cool technology to enhance the show, as opposed to a stage that looks like your dad made it in your basement. How formal is this really?
Exactly. One of the most interesting parts of theater is the huge amount of collaboration that's involved in having the show come together. You have all of your designers working together with the director to make sure that all the concepts match, whether it be for lighting, costume, or even the sounds that the play includes. Directors may have a preliminary meeting with their designers to brainstorm and to get general concepts together.
They also may look at things such as past performances and what would have been typical for the time period, as well as how they would have interacted with different objects to get a general idea of how to set everything up.
It's important for everyone to stay on the same page with this type of stuff, because every element in a stage production interacts with another. It's all connected, and it can make or break a play. They also have to be conscious of the fact that they have a budget and can't spend too much money on a singular element and underfund the rest.
And above all, respect. Everyone has to have respect and be understanding. They need to be professional and get along, otherwise things could get ugly really fast.
Absolutely.
Well, that's it for our discussion on stages. Thanks so much, Maggie, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Next up, we hear from Michelle and our special guest, the Fly Man, after this short break. Stay tuned.
In a world full of unpainted sets and not enough time, one product has answered the call. Scene in a can. This bad boy can take any set and turn it into a scenic masterpiece. From contemporary to surrealism, our product comes in many varieties, so pick what's best for you and your scene. Big sets, little sets, it does them all. Buy now and we'll throw in a miniature fourth wall. But wait, there's more. Call within the next 20 minutes and we'll throw in another fourth wall absolutely free. Call now at 1-800-243-TAC. That's 1-800-243-TAC.
Welcome to the second segment of our show. My name is Michelle, and for the next few minutes, I'll be interviewing Robert. He was the director of a high school production of Softly and has recently returned from working on the musical premiere of Fly, More Than You Fall. He will discuss with me his experiences in relation to scene design. So welcome, Robert.
Glad to be here, Michelle.
Well, before we get started, I want to make sure I thank our sponsor for this segment. It's the United Scenic Artists Union. They're allowing this portion of our show to run ad-free, and we really appreciate their support and want to recognize them as their efforts often go unnoticed. So, just to start off, Robert, I heard your nickname is the Fly Man. Now, I'm sure I'm dating myself here, but the phrase reminds me of a 1986 horror film about a man that turns into a fly, and I'm sure that's not what it's referencing. So where did it come from?
Well, so that's a funny story. So about a month ago, I was a fly operator in the musical Fly More Than You Fall. So basically, in layman's terms, I put people in harnesses and I flew them across the stage. So that was really fun. But a big part of my theater history is not only doing that, but like you said, I was a director of the high school play Softy.
Okay, so for our audience, tell us what is a scene designer and director?
So basically, scene designer is just the man who designs the scene of the play before they are built, just so you have a nice blueprint of what's going on and what artistic visions you have, so you know where to go when you're building your scene.
Okay. You know, I recently read an article about Michael Yergin, who's a scene designer and professor of stage design at Yale. The article mentioned that in fourth grade, after attending the opera, he created a shadow box of one of the scenes he has created. He said this was the start of his love of scene design. And based on the list of designs credited to him, I'd say he's quite a successful one. His most current work being this year's touring production of My Fair Lady. So what does it take to be a successful scene designer? I mean, is it true that you need skills of an architect, painter, historian, interior designer, CAD operator, and builder? I mean, that's quite the resume.
Yeah, no joke. That's quite a lot. Really, it just depends on how professional you are. So I was just a director of a high school production. So obviously it was whatever we thought was best. You know, I was just on the seat of my pants, right? So I didn't have very much experience. But if I was in a professional theater, like I was in Fly More Than You Fall, I'm sure the production manager there was like, had all of those above skills, like interior designer, CAD operator, because it was very nice and very exquisite. So I'm assuming he had that, all that experience you were talking about.
Mm-hmm. So, as a scene designer, are you there throughout the whole production process?
Well, since I'm not totally sure about the professional level, but since I was the director, I had to be there every rehearsal. When I was designing the set, I was there. I was there because they were working on the designs during act rehearsal. So we actually didn't get finished until basically a week before we had to perform it. So I would assume the professional level, they would have to be there the whole time.
Right. So you don't just create something, design something, and say, here you go, good luck. You're pretty much there through the whole.
Yeah, because I think one thing you have to learn is you also have to learn how easy and how much it makes sense to do something. Because I've seen many times where somebody's like, let's do this, and then you learn later, oh wait, that's not actually possible in the real world, so we have to do this. So
Right.
that's probably one of the main reasons why you have to be there the whole time.
Okay. So what types of scenic units do you typically use?
And in a theater, you use every single one, but in our production of Softy, and you can actually in our pictures, we actually have a picture of the Softy backdrop. It's the black and white one. Our backdrop was purely soft units. So to make it very simple, we just used the curtains on the stage. And then instead of just using a bunch of framed, we used 3-dimensional objects. Because one, it was a lot easier to move, but two is for the artistic style.
Okay. So there are, I know there's soft and framed and 3-dimensional. So so it's pretty typical then to use all of them.
Yeah. For example, in Fly More Than You Fall, we did have a front curtain in scrim, but most everything else was framed and 3-dimensional. And the main reason why is because you'll always have more than one, but it's important that you don't make your set look busy. Using too many scenic units is a big culprit of that. And most of the time, minimalism is the best way to go, because it's just the best way to go.
Right. Otherwise it distracts from the actual production of the thing.
Exactly.
Okay, so once all these elements are created, it would be quite the orchestration to shift and move pieces according to the needs of the production. So how are these pieces moved?
So in Softy, in the high school production, the backdrop was made out of 3 rectangular blocks of wood, and you can see that in the picture, with wheels on the bottom. And based on the scene, there were stagehands that would turn them. So most of the time, especially in like high school productions, you'll have stagehands, people moving everywhere. Whenever you have sets, like in professional theater, whenever you have scenes that you want to get really fast, you would use the fly system. I'm not 100% sure about the wagon thing. I've never come across that, but yeah.
Okay. So I know there's many options available today for scene designers. I mean, a friend told me he likes to use 3D printers to create some of his smaller set pieces. And I thought that was ingenious. But what materials do you use? I know typically wood, steel, aluminum, styrofoam.
So first off, that's really cool about the 3D printing. If it were up to me, I'd do that with everything. Sadly, when you're in high school, you don't really have a budget for that. But in our production, we used a lot of wood because it was just really easy to manipulate and it was pretty strong. In the past, I've used a lot of styrofoam. And there was one production in my high school when we used canvas as our backdrop. And that was actually really cool.
Yeah. Well, so were there any limitations to the production space you used, and how did you overcome it?
So the play we were performing was actually a competition play. And because it was, we were performing on a stage that was smaller than the stage we practiced on. So we overcame that by taping the dimensions of the smaller stage on ours and just practiced on that. And it proved to be a little hard, but we got used to it.
Right. So that was definitely something you foresaw from the beginning of the process. But what about things that haven't been foreseen? How important is that technical rehearsal? And did you have to change much during that time?
So tech rehearsal is absolutely important to that. Our biggest challenge was, in a perfect world, you can just move a set instantly on and instantly off, and you don't have to worry about that. But since the stage is so big, there's a lot of stage, and when you're moving giant blocks of wood, it can be really hard and time consuming. So we had to, every rehearsal, we would take time to, okay guys, let's practice our moving on and on sets. That way, one, it was done really fast, but it was done artistically, and we were able to balance everything on the stage in a really easy manner.
Okay. Well, I wanted to have a more in-depth discussion with you about the specifics of assembling and painting scenery, but in the interest of time, I think we'll defer our listeners to reading the text on that one. After all, Brockett and Ball do a great job introducing these concepts, and I'd just be regurgitating their well-written words anyway. So turn to pages 374 to 376 to learn more about lining, blending, stenciling, spattering, sponging, scrumbling, and dry brushing. I love that word, scrumbling. We are out of time, but I just wanted to take a minute and recap what we've discussed for those listeners who may have tuned in late or just haven't read the chapter. Scene design basically defines the performance space like creating a floor plan, taking into account where the design team wants the audience to be and what they want the audience to see. It involves masking any areas needed to be obscured. The design organizes and defines the space for the best movement and character interaction using different levels, platforms, steps, doors, even furniture. Depending on the focus of the production, the team may choose to design the space more realistically or emphasize the social and environmental factors which affect the characters. In this case, the designer wants to make sure he realistically represents locations or time periods. Or if the team wants to be less specific and emphasize a more timeless approach, they may be more fragmentary. Scene design can greatly determine the mood and atmosphere of the play as well by using elements that conjure emotions such as untroubled and cheerful. So you could imagine maybe a playful, bright scenery, or dreary and oppressive. Imagine dark, monotone scenery here. While it's only one part of the whole process, scene design really sets the stage, the blank stage, if you will, for the rest of the design elements. Thank you, Robert, for joining us today.
Yeah, no pleasure. My pleasure.
In a future segment of our show, we will have an interview with Ming-Cho Lee, famed scene designer and up until 2005, Dean of American Set Design at Yale. If you're in the business, surely you know who he is. If not, you've most likely seen some of his work. He uses metal or wood scaffolding to create a minimalist style, which he combines with fragments of scenery. He's going to specifically talk about his work within both the arena and thrust stages, as that has been his most successful work. You're not going to want to miss it. Well, that's all, folks. Be sure to catch us next week as we discuss historical professional theater in Chapter 5. See you then.